Let's head into the NBA TV basement where James Ham joins us. Hey, Ham.
Hey, what's going on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you, man. Just fine there in that NBA TV brick wall that they got you. Got the lighting nice. You look good though. This works well. There we go.
I'm a little like the lighting is really bright, so I can like turn it like it's not good.
Yes, it is. I could see why that would be bothersome. It's like that one light directly in front of me that just that is that you talk about light the beam. That is the light that is directly in front of me. It just shoots right down. We were talking about what the broadcast will sound like tonight. This is national television. This is ESPN, and there's going to be a lot of talk about Doug Christie and 9-2 and Mike Brown and this turnaround that the Sacramento Kings have experienced, looking for 7 straight at the Golden One Center. But there's also going to be a lot about the inexplicable drop-off of the Golden State Warriors, which James Ham correctly predicted when they were 12-3 a eternity ago. That this team has fallen apart. But as we laid out a moment ago, Steph Curry's still box office. People are still going to tune in to watch him play. And it's why, despite the records, the Kings and the Warriors still feels like a big rivalry game headed into tonight.
Yeah, I think it is a big rivalry game. This is a huge game for the Kings. You know, there's a big difference between heading out on the road for a 6-game road trip with 1 game over 500 versus 3 games over 500. You know, I don't think anyone expects the Kings to just keep rolling and pick up 6 straight wins here on the road starting tomorrow in Denver. But you know, if you can go into that stretch and you're already 3 games over, you know, can you go 3-3? Can you go 4-2 and start building something? And so while I don't want to look past the Golden State Warriors, I do think that this is one of those games where, you know, a month ago, we're worried whether the Kings are going to show up and they're going to get trounced by a bad team. Last year, we were worried was whether this team was going to show up and get thumped by somebody who's kind of down on their luck. I just don't feel that with this team right now, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're all drinking the purple colored Kool-Aid here with Doug Christie taking over, but I feel like the team is much better suited to walk into a game that you really need and come out with a win, where I just don't think that was who they were a couple of weeks ago.
I also think there's a point, Hammer, where we look at this team and we recognize we're not drinking purple Kool-Aid anymore. We're recognizing this is a good basketball team. And if 11 games is too early to make that determination, I don't, maybe 15 to 20 is the right time to make that determination. That's like a quarter of the season. But nothing about what we're watching right now doesn't feel real. Like, it's not like the Kings are shooting 49% from 3 in every game that they play. Like, this feels like a team that has won a number of basketball games over the last 11 games in different ways, whether it was, hitting a bunch of shots like they did against the Golden State Warriors the first time, or they just get in a fist fight and wind up getting through that one.
Yeah, I do think that there's a resiliency that we're starting to see from this Kings team. And it's something that was just lacking. And again, I'm not trying to put anything on Mike Brown, and I don't know why it is that things worked out the way they did here in Sacramento. Like, anyone who thinks that they knew exactly what happened here, they're just wrong. There is no way to know what exactly happened here and why a team stopped responding in the correct way to a coach. But like since Doug has taken over, it has been like a really good fight each and every night. Throw out the Lakers game to start this whole thing, and then again, maybe take out the Bucks game. Outside of that, like, this team is just figuring it out on the fly, and it's something we're waiting for, like the first 10 games of the season, the first 20 games of the season. Like, why are you guys not figuring out how to close out games? Like, this team has too much talent to be in the position that they're in. But now I think we're all starting to see like they just needed something different, and whatever that is, it's working. And really, kudos to Doug Christie for figuring out a way to connect in a way that, again, I've seen so many coaches in the past not be able to, whether it's Alvin Gentry or it's Ty Corbin or Keith Smart named that coach that took over midseason for the Kings during the last 15 years.
Yeah, Hammer, you mentioned those teams, you mentioned those coaches, with all due respect to like Alvin and those guys. I think very highly of Alvin. That wasn't a good basketball team that he had. Like those were bad basketball teams that those guys were tasked with coaching. This team isn't bad. It was never bad. And that'll be one of the talking points throughout this season, and perhaps even when this season is over, is they grossly underachieved prior to Doug Christie taking over. And I think it was something that even they recognized at the time. And as you mentioned, Doug was the catalyst to, turning this thing around. Sometimes it's not always the message, it's the messenger. It's the way that the message is being delivered. And Doug has found a way to get through to these guys that Mike clearly couldn't, and they just seem to be playing a completely different type of basketball, something far more reminiscent of what they did 2 years ago, but perhaps even better.
Yeah, I think all of that's correct. And I would tell you, go back to the last game where Keegan Murray didn't have a great shooting night at all, where Kevin Herter didn't have a great shooting night, where, De'Aaron Fox struggled with his shot. Um, and they still won. They won handily. They
Mhm.
won by 20. And so I think that's what you're starting to look for, is like these moments where the Kings can figure out ways to progress even when the 3-point shot isn't falling or somebody gets hot. You're figuring out ways to grind out victories. And sometimes it's going to be DeMar DeRozan taking over. Sometimes it's going to be De'Aaron Fox. Sometimes it's going to be Malik Monk. Sometimes it's going to be, Keon Ellis hitting 6 3-pointers. But it doesn't matter. Like, this team is all in together. They're fighting for the right outcome. And the only thing that really matters, even heard Doug Christie talk about it the other night. Someone saying, well, De'Aaron Fox had an off night. He's like, what are you talking about? He had 13 assists. Like, what do you mean he had an off night? He's a player that can orchestrate a team and make a team better without scoring. Would you like to see him have a big scoring night here and there? Yeah, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't productive and that he wasn't part of the reason why the Kings won that night. And I think that that's what we're going to see more and more of, is, a different guy might step up every night. Like, three different people might step up every night. But as long as you're all pulling the same direction and you're supporting each other in those moments, then you're not going to have a lot of problems.
You mentioned a couple of guys having bad shooting nights against Washington, James. One guy who didn't was Keon. And it feels like Keon, and it doesn't feel like it's in the numbers, it's in the eye test. Like, Keon has been, perhaps no surprise, unlocked by Doug Christie. And one thing that stands out to me when we discuss like maybe things that went wrong prior to Doug Christie taking over is when you think back to last year, even though the Kings, had their shortcomings last year prior to the injuries, even though Keon's role escalated after, Kevin Herter and Malik Monk get hurt, there was a respect that Keon seemed to earn from De'Aaron Fox and Harrison Barnes and from Keegan Murray and from guys that he was out there on the floor with. They would all talk about how what Keon was doing helped make them better, particularly on the defensive end. And it felt like a lot of that was dismissed by Mike Brown. And that's why we heard the term situational role player to start the season. That's why, we were a little hokey pokey with Keon's minutes. And I wonder if some of that influenced the other guys as well. Like, there's a player that we have on our roster who does something really, really good for us, but Mike just doesn't see it in him. Doug does. And now you see, James, you use the term sixth starter all of the time. It feels like the Kings got a sixth starter out there with Keon Ellis being the first man off the bench.
Yeah, I feel like he's a six starter. I also think, Keon had an opportunity when De'Aaron Fox and when Keegan Murray went down, and then even when Malik Monk went down. So right there, that's 6 games where he got to play that he might not have had to, the opportunity to see 35, 36 minutes. And those moments, those are like, they're real big confidence boosters, but it also just lets you settle into who you should be on a nightly basis. And I think that that's something that was kind of miss when you're playing 13 minutes one night, 18 minutes another night, 26, 28 minutes the next night. And so I feel like some of it is situational. I mean, look at the first couple of games that Keon Ellis had under Doug Christie. It's like 11, it's like 13 minutes. Even a couple of nights ago, he didn't play that much. And I mentioned this before, like, don't forget that Doug was working, Mike's sub patterns. He's the one who's subbing guys in and out of the game the whole time, as part of one of his duties. And it's not to like blame anything on Doug because those were Mike's calls. It was Mike's call how long he's going to play and all that stuff. But I think Doug also got in just sort of the habit of this is when so and so subs in and this is when so and so subs out. And
Mhm.
so I think there are going to be times where, Keon plays a ton of minutes. And then there are going to be other games where, maybe it is Devin Carter who steps up and has a big game, and you start to play him a little bit more. And I think in the end, it'll all balance out. Keon's going to be a very, very valuable member of this team. And just look at where he's at right now. I think he's sixth or eighth in the league in 3-point percentage. He just keeps hitting nonstop. And that's the thing that I think a lot of the players know. They know that he's a great shooter. They see him behind the scenes, and it doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter how he gets those threes. You know where to find him on the court. He's a catch and shoot guy, and you feel really, really confident with whether or not the shot is going to go down when it leaves his hand. And I think that that's something that, as a player, if you're out there, wheeling, dealing like De'Aaron Fox or Demonis Sabonis, or even Malik Monk, and you're getting assists, you want to pass to guys who are going to hit the shots, because not only does it help your team, but it also gives you assists and it helps your cause as well. And I think Keon is quietly built the trust of his teammates, and it's not just from on the defensive side of the ball. It's that they all believe he's going to hit the shot every single time. And when it doesn't go in, they also know he's going to fly in and try for the rebound, or he's going to swat the ball underneath the basket. He's going to do something to impact the game, and you appreciate players like that. So, yeah, I mean, for me, Keon is one of those. It's a true like diamond in the rough find for the
Mhm.
Kings. And
Mhm.
if you were to put Keon like in a draft and redraft everything from his year, I mean, he's a guy who's probably going, between 10 and 15 in the draft. He's been that productive when given an opportunity. And that's something that you can, kind of pen your hat to, if you're a GM who found a kid who's an undrafted free agent and had him turn into a high level NBA rotational player.
Can you elaborate a little bit? Because I've heard you say this before. I know you tweeted it, and I think you got jumped in your mentions over it, but you talked about Doug Christie handling the substitution patterns for Mike. Is that Doug handling Mike's substitution patterns?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, you have all kinds of different pieces to the puzzle as far as a coach, right?
Mhm.
And so, like the last couple of years, Jordy Fernandez handled all of the substitution patterns for Mike. Mike has a sheet, like everyone knows going into the game what's going to happen, and then during the game, Mike makes decisions like, "Hey, so and so is playing really well. I'm going to leave him in a little bit longer."
Mhm.
Or, so and so can't hit a shot tonight, so I'm just going to switch up and go away from player X and go to player Y. All of those things, those are coaching decisions that happen. And even at halftime, coaches will confer and say, "Hey, what's going well, what's going wrong," and come out with a little bit of a tweak of the game plan in the second half. But the chart and the responsibility of going over and telling a guy, "Hey, I need you to get up and go get ready. You're going in at the 6 minute mark." That is a responsibility for one of the assistant coaches. And again, to start this year, Mike talked about it, that was one of Doug's responsibilities. And this isn't to put any blame on Doug, or blame shift from Mike to Doug. It was
Mhm.
Mike's substitution patterns that Doug was initiating. But at the same time, like it's a function of the job. And when Doug takes over as a head coach, he's going to rely on some of the things he knows. And then as it goes along, we've seen Doug's not been shy about changing it up. I
Yeah.
mean, for all the people out there who cry every time Keon Ellis doesn't play enough minutes, like there was a point where people were doing the same exact thing with Isaac Jones. Isaac Jones hasn't sniffed the court. He's put up 42 in the G League the other night. He's not playing at all unless it's in the final 2 or 3 minutes of a game right now. And that's a Doug,
No,
Christie decision.
I think the Isaac Jones thing at that time might have been a dude, try something. Like anything, like nothing's working. And
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone feels that way like right now.
Well, I mean, like I think during that time though, like you're walking into games and guys aren't playing well, and you're
Mhm.
like, can you give somebody else those minutes? And he's not giving them to Isaac Jones, and that's okay. Like Isaac Jones is a young two-way player. He's running out of two-way days. He's at like 37 like days that he's been active. So I think he only has 13 more games he can be active before he's not allowed to play anymore without upgrading his contract. So like there are reasons why Isaac Jones might not be playing, but my point is that like look, these are tough decisions, and when you're going through and creating a rotation for each and every night, like sometimes guys get left out. Sometimes guys that played really well against players get left out, and it's just a matter of like what a coach thinks the matchups are for the evening, and after they're done with their scouting report and everything else, like there's a feel to it, and for whatever reason Doug seems to have a good feel. But at the same point, it's not like Kevin Herter has walked out there and all of a sudden looked like Kevin Herter under Doug Christie, where he didn't
Right.
under Mike Brown. He just hasn't. Like
Yep.
Kevin Herter is struggling as bad now as he was before, and even Doug addressed that during post game the other night, just saying, "Hey, look, we still believe in Kevin. We still want Kevin shooting. We still put our arm around Kevin and tell him, we love him and we want him as part of the team." Um, and eventually he will hit his shots. That's Doug's mentality. But like it's not like Doug walked in the door and every player that was playing poorly is playing amazing now, and everything is working seamlessly, and the Kings are just succeeding because Doug is like figured it all out. Like this is a process that continuously moves and changes, and I think he's doing a really good job of being adaptable, but also of supporting his players in the right way with the hopes that it pays off down the road.
I think that's part of the playing free and loose and relaxed that both Doug and many members of the roster have talked about is the ability to, and I sympathize with Kevin Herter to a certain degree. Like Doug saying the right things. It's exactly what he said with Keegan Murray when he took over as the Kings head coach. We're going to put our arms around him. We're going to tell him we love him. We're going to tell him to keep taking that shot. But unlike Keegan Murray, what we're going to do if he's not is he's going to stay in that single digit minute range. And that's where he's been for the last couple of games. We saw him play 9 minutes. We saw him play 8 minutes. Like if the production isn't there from him and you got other guys that are working, whether it's DeMar, whether it's Keegan, whether it's Keon, Doug may tend to lean on them. But he'll continue to preach positivity to those guys. But if they're not going to help them win games, Doug might pull back a little bit. And we saw him, or we're seeing him, we're witnessing him pull back a little bit on Kevin Herter.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to, right? Like, there's a certain point where you're concerned about like showing teams around the league that a player is still available to play, that they're healthy enough, right? And I think, like a prime example is Cam Johnson missed like 5 or 6 games with an ankle injury. And then all of a sudden he pops up and he plays one game and looks really good. Then he sits a couple more games and now he's playing again. And you're trying to show teams around the league, like, look, he's fine. He's fine. John Collins has sat something like 12 of the last 13 games with a hip issue. And that hip issue, from what I've heard, is really it's nothing, and it's
Sketchy.
not something that should keep him out of games.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a convenient excuse for a team that has no interest in winning basketball games to keep a player out without incurring NBA fines. And so, there are these reasons why you play players, but at the end of the day, Doug Christie was brought in as an interim head coach, replacing a two-time NBA Coach of the Year in Mike Brown, a guy who has the second best win percentage in Sacramento Kings history, a guy who took a 16-year playoff drought and won 18 more games, and all of a sudden they made the playoffs. Like he's replacing a coach that did a lot right, but everybody in Sacramento knows his team was underperforming, and it's Doug's job to not be a nice guy, not to like stay with a guy and let him shoot you out of a season. His job here is to win games, because if he doesn't win games, he's not going to get the real job. And he knows that, and everybody else knows that. And so when you watch and see how Doug is coaching, there is a certain amount of, hey, make sure everybody knows that somebody is still healthy if you want to trade for them. But when push comes to shove, I'm going to go for the win, and I'm not going to worry about how many minutes somebody's playing. That's not my job. My job is to win games, and my job is to do the best job I can to turn this thing around. So maybe you can get the head coaching job for the next 4 or 5 years. And that's what I see from Doug. Like if a player is not working out, he doesn't have some little mechanism in the back of his head saying, hey, I've got to play him because X, Y, and Z. The only X, Y, and Z that matters to Doug right now is, will I win the game if he's in there? Can I win the game with this player? And to me, that's how you should be coaching. But that's not always the way NBA coaches are coaching. And it's because basketball is usually a lot more complex than, hey, these are my 8 best players, so I'm going to play them every night.
James Ham live from the NBA TV bunker at the Golden One Center. It's the Sacramento Kings and the Golden State Warriors tonight on ESPN. We'll come back and we'll talk more with our insider from the Insiders. It's James Ham here with Dylan and Casey on Sacramento Sports Leader ESPN 1320. Clear. Good stuff, Hammer.
What's going on? These lights are making my eyes water, but I don't know. My eyes are just sensitive today for whatever reason, whether it's allergies or, I don't know, lack of sleep. A little glossy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ones in the studio were messing with my eyes earlier.
Yeah, these glasses saved me from these damn things up here.
Oh, yeah. I can move that one if you need me to.
No, I think it's maybe we can mess around with it. I don't want it to take too much life off of us, but yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Oh man, what do we got? I'm gonna grab it. Hang on, James. I'll be back in 1 second.
Yep. What's going on, everybody? Yeah, they're like really bright banks of lights. I show everybody. Like, I'm literally in the cinder block room, but they're super bright lights. And there's another right there. And they light you up well, but they also make your eyes water. Is this the lanyard is my credential? Which technically I'm not supposed to have on when I'm on show stuff.
Is that real?
What?
You're not supposed to have your credential on?
No, and you're not supposed to ever take a picture of your credential and post it somewhere, because people can copy them and then try to get in. Yeah.
Got it.
My golf game, you ask, how's my golf game? It's not very good because I have no back left. I used to golf a lot when I was younger. Samwise, are we going to discuss the Cam Johnson stuff on the air?
We can do that. I'll star that because everyone was talking about what you said yesterday.
Yeah, that, and Mark Stein has a thing directly from somebody that says, hey, we haven't had discussions with them forever. That doesn't matter. Yeah. See, Dave Garcia. It's people like you trying to get me to get my badge up there. Got a lot of these now.
Yeah, I bet.
And then the back has like a very, very long explanation of your
Yeah.
your rights or lack thereof as a media member. I have credentials from a lot of events. I think I just got my All-Star credential sent in through Charlie.
Oh, there you go.
He has to do that, just so you know, not us. He has the Mystic Portal.
Does he know that?
He does now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he got me put in earlier.
Okay.
So.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
Chatty House, I do keep all my credentials. I have picture on my wall about this big with a bunch of credentials all stacked in on top of each other and layered.
It's almost time. I have the line from Mark Stein. I'll read to you to get into the Cam Johnson stuff.
Yeah.
About 20 seconds.
Cool. Hit the thumbs up, people.
All right, here we go, James. James Ham joining us as he does every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This time live from the Golden One Center. Sacramento Kings take on the Golden State Warriors tonight on national television, looking for their 10th win in 12 games and their 7th straight at the Golden One Center. We'll talk more about that in just a bit. Hammer, want to read this to you. This from your boy, your buddy Mark Stein. The Sacramento Kings have been frequently mentioned this month as an aggressive trade suitor for the Nets sharpshooter Cam Johnson, but sources told the Stein line on Wednesday that there have been no discussions between the Kings and Nets regarding Johnson for weeks. Sources say that the Kings, at this juncture, do not see a pathway to a workable deal with the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson. Hammer, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, like, look, if the Kings aren't going to give up the unprotected pick that Brooklyn's been asking for, then no, I don't think there is a pathway. Like, look, we've talked about this so many times, but the Kings don't have they don't have second round picks to sweeten a deal, right? They don't have a bunch of extra stuff laying around that they can say, hey, how about this or how about that? You know, that would make this deal easier to stomach. And so the Kings have to decide whether they want to up the sort of the value of what they're offering, or if they want to move on to somebody else. Um, and so far, I mean, they've had an opportunity here for a couple of weeks. Like these two teams were hot and heavy like a couple of weeks ago. You know, maybe it's been a month at this point, but that doesn't. They both understand the parameters of what they would have to give up, what the Kings would have to give up, and what the Nets are willing to take in order to close a deal. And that doesn't change, you know, at all by what Mark Stein reported. Like they're very clear about what it would take to get a deal done between these two teams.
Now, can you lay this out? I know you discussed it yesterday on the Insiders, and it got a lot of attention both locally and nationally. about what a pathway, to use Mark Stein's word, would look like for the Sacramento Kings to acquire Cam Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, like everything I've heard is that again, Brooklyn wants an unprotected pick from the Kings, and the Kings weren't willing to give an unprotected first round pick. And like maybe that's changed over the course of the last week or so or 2 weeks. But at the same time, I don't think it has. The Kings have an idea of what they would give up in a trade for Cam Johnson, but you have to be super cautious if you're this team, especially 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when this team was in the tank and was really struggling and 6 games under 500. That's not a team you go and give a 2027 first round pick to go get a player who's going to be a rotational player, but probably not a starter for you. You don't go out and give up like unprotected picks in that situation. And so I don't blame the Kings for being slightly cautious with this. But at the same time, like, it takes something to get something in the NBA. And if the Kings again had multiple things to offer or were willing to offer multiple picks, I think this deal would have already been done. We even there was a point where it started to sound like maybe Devin Carter could be part of some sort of trade
Mm-hmm.
conversation. Maybe he wouldn't be. But again, it was like, how do you sweeten the deal with Brooklyn to get the deal done? And at the end of the day, clearly the Kings aren't confident with what the offer is and what it would take to go get Cam Johnson. And I don't blame them. I mean, I would be extremely cautious as well. We saw this play out. Somebody tweeted this today, either today or yesterday, that 2 years ago, Kyle Kuzma, the Wizards were looking for 2 first round picks, and then last year they were willing to trade him for 1 first round pick, and right now, they'll be lucky if they get a second round pick for Kyle Kuzma in his contract.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of the dynamics of this whole deal. And if I'm the Kings, I'm looking at Cam Johnson sort of in a similar way. Like Cam Johnson, he's got a perfectly good contract, right? It's I think it's 20.5 million next year and 22.5 the year after. And so that's a really good contract. And people say, well, the Nets can just hold on to him and trade him this summer. It's like, okay, well, but at that point he's 29 and in his 30-year season, he'll turn 30 during the season, and a 2-year deal versus 2.5 years, or if you wait until the deadline and a year and a half of Cam Johnson isn't worth nearly as much as it is right now, where it's 2.5 years of Cam Johnson. I'd also caution everybody, like Cam Johnson, again, I like him as a player. He's long, he's athletic, he does a lot of the things we talk about the Kings need. He's also not someone who's consistently ever done what he's doing right now in the basketball court. And part of the reason he's being so successful right now with the Brooklyn Nets is because they're a bad team and somebody has to score on that team. And is he hitting his shots? Yes. Is he doing the things that you need to do to make yourself extremely valuable? Absolutely. But if you put him on a Sacramento Kings roster, can you envision him averaging 19 point something points per game? Or do you think he's going to shrink back closer to the 14, 15 points per game that he's been averaging? And if that's the case, like what's the value in that? And how much is he really worth on the open market, especially when you consider the age, the years of contract, and all that stuff? So it's a complex puzzle that you're always looking at for these teams. And, again, I would be slightly concerned about throwing a ton of assets at the Nets for Cam Johnson, specifically because I don't know that his game. I know he's going to be a good player. I know it's going to translate. He'll be in your rotation, but is he a full fledged like game changer for you? And maybe the answer is yes. But I also have some concerns whether he's going to step up and be that player when he gets here. Where I don't have that same concern when it comes to a guy like John Collins. John Collins is who he is as a scorer. He's
Mm-hmm.
proven it time and time again. If you're coming off the bench or you're starting, you hope you know exactly what you're going to get out of John Collins. And sure, he's had an up and down career, but his up and down career still as a very, very forceful and efficient scorer, and a guy who can, when he's not scoring, can go get you 8 rebounds, 10 rebounds a night. And that's not something that we've seen from Cam Johnson consistently over his career.
Hammer, the guys we hear about the most, I think you just mentioned all three of them. John Collins, Cam, and Kyle Kuzma. All three of those scenarios, is a first round pick, an unprotected first round pick, off the table for you in a deal involving any one of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, that would be really, really tough. I mean, you can do top 3 or top 5 protected, but, like, you're still gonna stretch that out over multiple years. Part of the good thing about giving up an unprotected pick is that you don't get caught in the situation the Kings are right now with the Kevin Herter pick,
Right.
right? So there is something good about, that you don't have a pick that year. You can't trade the pick the year before or the year after that, and then away you go. But if you do like a lottery protected 2027 that's top, let's say top 14 and then top 10, I mean, you could end up not giving up a first round pick in a couple of years, and eventually you would have to give up an unprotected pick, or you'd have to do something like what they did with the Herder deal, where it dissolves into 2 second round picks.
Mhm.
I don't think that. Well, first of all, the Kings don't have those second round picks to offer to do that. But I also don't think that that's what the Brooklyn Nets are interested in. They want to get better. They want to get better quickly, but they also look at teams like the Kings and kind of circle this 3-year window where maybe the Kings aren't as good as they are today, and you're going to start capitalizing on that by getting a much higher draft pick, and it does make sense. It's why the Kings, were asked to give up a pick swap in 2031. That's straight up just the Spurs banking that their team is going to be better than the Sacramento Kings in 2031. It's probably a good bet.
Is part of
You're the
the
one. Go ahead.
Sorry, James, is part of the reason that the Kings don't have second round picks to dangle, or is it the reason the Kings don't have second round picks to work with here because of the Herder conversion chart?
Yeah. So
I know they've
the
traded a couple of them along the way. Like you've been emphatically frustrated about that. But listening to you talk about the 2 picks converting, it made me wonder, like, is that part of the reason they don't have as many picks as other people
well, of
seem to have?
course. Yeah. It's part of the reason you have your 2029, and then the Kings have this ridiculous 2025 second round pick that's it's protected 30 through 55. So if
Mhm.
it's one of the last 5 picks in the draft and it's from the Chicago Bulls, so it's already not going to be one of the top 5 picks in the draft, one of the bottom 5 picks in the draft. Like,
Mhm.
so if they're going to be a great team, then you would get that. So you can't even count it as a second round pick at this point. Um, but the way that it works is the Kings owe Atlanta first round pick. It's top 12 protected, I believe, in 2025, and in 2026 it's top 10 protected. And if it doesn't relay in 26, then Atlanta gets the Kings 2026 and 2027 second round picks. So at this point, you cannot trade those. You could put them in a trade and say, well, if this, and this happens, then you can have this and this pick. But if not, what is the other solution? Because there is no other solution. You don't have even a 2031 second round pick to say, well, it could become this 2031 pick, if you're trying to do something like trade multiple second round picks for something.
Okay. This
It's
Herder.
complicated.
No, this Herder deal it's the deal from hell. This is
Hey,
absolutely the deal from hell.
it's almost identical to what happened years ago when the Kings traded Omri Caspi to the Cavs
Mhm.
for Hickson and a first round pick. The Kings waived Hickson before, I believe, before the All-Star break. Like, we're just done. They could not trade him, and then they waived him and said, "Go ahead and go. We're done with you," right? But they owed a future, a protected first round pick in that trade. Well, that pick ended up going all over the place, and it ended up being with the Bulls. And the way that it worked out, that during the 2017 NBA draft, if the Kings, so I think that trade happened in 2011, where they picked up Hickson, but in the 2017 NBA draft, the Kings had this pick hanging over them. So in 2016, at the trade deadline, they knew that if they were a playoff team, they had a top 10 protected pick, right? That was owed to Chicago. They decided to bail on that season, traded DeMarcus Cousins, held on to that pick because they dropped all the way down to number 8 in the lottery that season. Well, they dropped down to number 8 going into the lottery. Then, of course, that pick flew all the way up to number 3, where they had a pick swap with Philadelphia, and then dropped back to number 5, where they drafted De'Aaron Fox. So if the Kings would have been even not a playoff team, but still outside of the top 10, like the 11, 12, 13, 14th pick in the 2017 NBA draft, they would have lost that pick and not got De'Aaron Fox. And so that's part of the reason why they traded DeMarcus Cousins when they did.
Good times. Good times.
And the point, to just wrap it up, the point is
Yeah.
that it's the pick from the J.J. Hickson trade like 5-6 years earlier. So anyway.
Kevin Huerter, J.J. Hickson, same thing at this point. It's the deal from hell. The absolute deal from hell. If the Kings walked away from this trade deadline, which is, a handful of weeks away, with just say Valanciunas and no one else, be successful?
Maybe. I mean, it's tough because
it's obviously based on results, but
yeah. I mean, but I think a couple of things. Number one, I really like Jonas Valanciunas, and I think he would be great on this team, right? Mm-hmm. But I also understand that Valanciunas is owed $20 million over the next 2 years after this season. So it's $10 million and $10 million. That's a lot for a backup center. The Kings have got away with Alex Len or Neemias Queta and Alex Len or JaVale McGee and Alex Len, where you're spending $5 or $6 million on a center, on a backup center every year. When you have an expensive center like Domantas Sabonis, who plays 36 minutes a game and barely misses any games, having an insurance policy like Valanciunas and his 2-year, $20 million left after this year is a lot of insurance. And so, my concern is just straight up that I don't know that, number one, he's going to play enough minutes to make it worthwhile for you long term, but also that when you get to the playoffs, if you do make the playoffs, that you're going to be able to play Valanciunas at all, because most teams in the playoffs are going small ball 5, and I'd almost rather have in a playoff scenario a small ball 5 like Trey Lyles than I would a player like Valanciunas. Now, there's exceptions. Zach Edey's out there, Rudy Gobert's out there, Nikola Jokic is out there, but you also have to understand that there are teams that can go small and just play. Domas, they can't play off the court, but anyone else they might be able to play off the court, and so your investment might not pay off down the road.
Is there the team is playing well right now. Again, it's 9 of 11. Really, really hope to make it 10 of 12 tonight against the Golden State Warriors. But how realistic is it? Do you think this is it? This is the squad moving forward. This is the squad for the rest of the year. Kevin Huerter is going to be a significantly more attractive trade asset this summer and leading into the next trade deadline than he is right now. And maybe this team will have a better feel for where everyone is at.
Man, that's dangerous. I mean, I get it. And you're riding vibes right here and everything's going great. And you think that you've got a guy in Doug Christie that can just lead this thing all the way to the promised land. But, you're going to get into some games here coming up, especially this road trip, where you just look and you realize very quickly that you do not have the length and athleticism. What are you going to do against a team like the Knicks? What are you going to do at the end of that road trip when you got OKC and Minnesota back to back? There are definitely teams in this league, even Denver, that you just can't match up fully against without having more of those, 6'7" to 6'9" athletic 3-4 guys. And so I think it would be a disappointment, but at the same time, I mean, look at the last 2 trade deadlines. We're talking Kessler Edwards and Robin Lopez being acquired, and that's it. And so there's not a lot that's been done at the deadline by this group outside of the monster swing for the fence deal when it came to landing Sabonis. But the last 2 deadlines, this team had needs and they weren't addressed. And it's because they couldn't get deals done, or they didn't feel comfortable with what the offers were.
What do you think about tonight's game, James? The Warriors are obviously struggling. Kings are, the two teams are moving in the opposite direction. We saw the Warriors get blown out by 40 the other night against the Boston Celtics, the other day against the Boston Celtics. And then we saw the last time these two teams played, the Kings beat them by 30. The Warriors had 3 starters score a combined 13 points between Draymond Green, Trace Jackson Davis, and Dennis Schroeder. That's tough to overcome no matter how great Steph Curry is. And he was good in that game. But it's a team that's just, they're now sitting at 500, but their 500 looks a lot different than other teams' 500 because it's just too dramatically shifts in basketball. The first 15 games and then where we are now. And I don't know. It looks like the Kings are playing a bad basketball team tonight, but Steph Curry's on that team, so I always go in with a little angst.
Yeah, I mean, the injury report for the Warriors is brutal. No Draymond Green, no slow-mo. Who else are they missing? Oh, Pods is gone. Podziemski's gone. They're missing quite a few players. But that doesn't mean that they can't still jump up and beat you. Your Buddy Hield getting hot from 3, or Steph having one of his classic games, or Wiggins just turning back the clock on you for having a lot of trouble. That being said, this Warriors team isn't playing well, and the way the Kings are playing is that I like this mentality that Doug has. It does not matter who we're playing. We're going to play up to our standards and who we are, and we're not going to worry about that other team. That doesn't mean that they're not going to, send Keon Ellis to go chase Steph Curry all night long, or they're not going to mix things up here and there to, give him a look with Keegan Murray, followed by De'Aaron Fox, and just keep changing things on Steph. But look, this is a team, and I think De'Aaron said it best yesterday at practice. He said, this is a team you got to kick when they're down, and that's it. You got to go in with that mentality that it doesn't matter who's not there or how they've been playing the last couple of weeks. You have a responsibility to go out there and try to get a win, try to extend your home win streak to 7 games, try to go out on the road, riding a 3-game home win streak or a 3-game win streak, and 3 games over 500 and some good momentum. And that's what you should be looking for tonight. Again, it doesn't matter who's playing on the other side. You go out there and play your style of basketball. Don't play down to the level of the opponent, a little bit like they did in the early game against Washington. Just come out and do sort of the same thing you did to Washington, but do it to the Golden State Warriors.
Man, that trip to the beam that Doug took them guys off on after their first win as a team under Doug Christie may wind up being a monumental moment in this season for Sacramento, because they haven't lost since that trip. They haven't lost since going up there and Doug giving that speech and it making its rounds across social media and talking about being the light in this city. And again, 6 straight, looking for 7 tonight against the Warriors. That was a big moment for this team.
It's a huge moment. And look, whatever, Kyle and I talked about this earlier today on the Insiders. Look, there were 2 ways for this team to improve coming into last season. We all talked about it coming into the season. They needed to be a better defensive team, make some incremental improvements. But also the second thing is they really, really needed to be better at home. And all of a sudden, Doug has found a way to make this team better at home. Going 23 at winning 23 games and 25 on the road in the 48-win season, that's unacceptable. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. And even last year, it was very similar. This team should be better at home than they were. And the fact that they've got back to 500 at home is a big deal, but they also need to figure out ways to keep this thing going and get, 8 games over 500 at home by the end of the season.
All right. Well, give me 7 straight tonight. That's what I want to see. Give me 10 and 12. And I'll be anxious to see how De'Aaron plays tonight. Doug will tell you it wasn't a bad night for De'Aaron Fox the other day against Washington. I don't know that De'Aaron would tell you that. De'Aaron is a bucket getter. He's a scorer, and we'll see what approach that he takes tonight after going 4 of 12 against the Washington Wizards. Same thing for Keegan Murray. Keegan Murray, 2 of 8 in that game, 31 minutes. That's 4 points. That's 16 points for those guys, well below what they regularly do. So we'll be tapped in tonight. It's the Sacramento Kings looking for win number 7 in a row at the Golden One Center, looking for 10 out of 12 with Doug Christie as their head coach. As always, make sure you're following James Ham on social media as he brings you commentary all throughout the game. Of course, his 6 quick thoughts when it's all over, and make sure you're tapped in for a full recap beginning tomorrow at 10 a.m. Kyle and James, the Insiders, here on Sacramento Sports Leader, ESPN 1320.